try this again. So I was about, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes into this when my OBS froze, so hopefully that doesn't occur again. This is a contest entry for one Dennis from the Analog Archives channel. If you aren't familiar, subscribe immediately. He just hit 1,000 subs. He's getting well over that now. I think he's got like 1,100 or something. Well deserved. Just a great channel. Super laid back, knowledgeable dude that has an incredible collection of a lot of metal, death metal, thrash metal, a little bit of hardcore. Super open-minded dude. Put this contest out there with some pretty good questions. I felt compelled to enter because this is a good bunch of topics here. There's 4, with one having a subtopic. Favorite gigs, which I'm going to be babbling for a while, so strap in. Get your caramel popcorn. Get your crappy caramel popcorn that you felt obliged to buy from your Boy Scout in your family. Wildest stuff to happen at a gig. Other music you like besides metal, just show some stuff off. Bad stuff you like. Objectively terrible stuff that you like. And what else do you collect? Some other examples there. So let's dig into it immediately because I've got some talking to do. So, some of my favorite gigs. I'm lucky. I have been a very avid music concert attender. Okay, an avid showgoer, I guess, since early 1992, which was my first hardcore show. If you didn't know, I grew up in Syracuse, so I attended a lot of Sunday matinee hardcore shows that were pretty iconic for the era, particularly for like the vegan straight edge and burgeoning metalcore scene. I'm from the same town that Earth Crisis is from, all that kind of stuff. So I grew up seeing Earth Crisis a lot, seeing Bloodlet, bands like Conviction, Unbroken, Strife, Mayday, Bloodlet. I already said Bloodlet. all that kind of stuff was really huge. Despair, who later members went on to be in Buried Alive, and then Terror. Lots and lots of stuff like that. There was the occasional show that was like a little bit more mellow, that was acceptable in that kind of scene, like Engine Kid or Sensefield would play Farside. I wasn't so into that stuff. I liked Lifetime and Farside. So that was a really good experience because this club was decent size. It had probably like a 400, 500 cap. A lot of weekends it was packed, and for a while there, the main promoter guy, John, was doing shows like clockwork, like every other Sunday, and there were very few that I saw that only had like 100 or 150 people at. It was a really good time to be getting into music, and not for nothing, not that I agree with the sentiments of everything put forth politically by those bands at the time. It was cool that it was a time in hardcore and punk where people actually stood for stuff. People actually would have discussions on stage. Like, you could go to a gig and see a Hare Krishna get into a debate with a Riot Girl. Like, it was just that era. I think upon it fondly. The odd dichotomy and, like, the dark side of the coin, the cool side of the pillow, was the night shows at this place, the Lost Horizon. I saw a lot of... It was a metal club, basically. And I saw a lot of really good metal gigs growing up because I was more or less a kid that was really into thrash and death metal that got into hardcore, and not the other way around. I knew some people that wasn't their entryway. They were more into whatever was playing 120 minutes, or they were into new wave or college rock and then got into hardcore. I got into all that lighter stuff way later, like towards the end of high school and stuff. But it was metal at this place primarily at night, so I saw like Entombed on the Hollow Man tour. They were incredible. I think it was Hollow Man they were touring after. It might have even been Clandestine. I don't remember. I don't think Wolverine Blues came out yet, though. Seem to specifically remember that. Typo Negative right after Bloody Kisses came out, and they were blowing up on MTV. The place was like packed way past capacity, and that was one of the things with that place. Pre the Rhode Island fire, the White Lion or White Snake? Great White. Pre that tragedy happening, this place didn't give a shit about packing in like you know, over almost 1,000 people into this place that would barely hold half that. One time I saw Marilyn Manson there, it was like that, and the ceiling got ripped down because he stormed off a stage and there was a riot. There's a crazy thing that happened at a show. We'll just throw that in there. And the Type O show was like that too, but nobody rioted because they played the whole set. But it was all stuff from Bloody Kisses and Slow Deep and Hard, and they were fucking incredible. Peter Steele came out with a comically huge bottle of red wine that was like the size of my torso. I don't know where he found this gigantic bottle of red wine, but it was definitely gone by the time he stepped off stage. So those are like early memories of some great gigs that I attended. Oh, one of the best death metal gigs that I ever attended there was Cannibal Corpse on the Bleeding Tour with Cynic and Sinister. Again, packed house. It was right before they relocated to Florida, so all the Buffalo people came down and everything with them. Or came to see them. They were on tour, so not down with them. Sinister were incredible. I remember thinking it was really silly that their singer was wearing a regular leather vest. I just thought that was so dorky and uncool for some reason. I don't know why. And nobody reacting to Cynic. Like, my friend Matt, I think, was like trying to mosh. He was doing some 90s like jumping jack clap mosh, like this thing that hardcore kids used to do. He was the only person moving because they had this really weird, you know, ethereal, bouncy, jazzy version of death metal that nobody was clicking with. And Cannibal Corpse, who, like, one of the wildest, pretty violent, but most fun pits I've ever been in. People just stage diving one after the other. Just really, really cool. Like, there's a lot of, like, there's a handful of, like, punk and like, sharp and, you know, hardcore kids there. So the pit looked like the cover of Thrash Zone by DRI, you know? It was like every subculture was well represented. It was really cool. That was a fun show. And then, you know, by the end of my tenure in Syracuse, after I graduated high school, a couple of years after that, I moved to Boston, and then Maine, and then moved back to Syracuse, and then back to Boston. So I did this big circuit, and I traveled a lot when I had the money to go to shows all over the East Coast. Went on tour with some bands a few times, my friend's band, Black Sheep Squadron. So I've seen a ton of bands. I'm just trying to think of the highlights. I mean, Boston had this massive punk scene that I was taking part of, and you see bands like The Unseen and Toxic Narcotic. Almost said Toxic Holocaust. You'd see Toxic Narcotic all the time, and they were always fun. There was also, like, kind of next to that, adjacent to it, and bleeding over, and with certain bands, there was the massive hardcore scene that was going on at the time, the Youth Crew Revival stuff, and Blood for Blood, you know, this really heavy, like, tough guy kind of band that were awesome. You know, super intense band that I saw once, like, in their heyday, which is the set that's on their Wasted Youth Brew compilation LP that has a live set on it, and that was a memorial show for a couple of their friends that passed away. That was one of the most violent things I've ever seen. Definitely got punched in the face, like, dead on, and was too hammered to care. So that was a good time. All those shows in Boston were really fun. Lots of basement shows, which could be dangerous, you know, and just in terms of, like, your head getting jammed into, like, some kind of weird heater or something, some kind of duct, you know. But they were always fun. And then, you know, again, there was, like, metal shows going on, and my drummer and guitarist from the band that I was playing in were getting pretty into extreme metal. I always had an interest in it that kind of ebbed and flowed with the times, but especially getting into crust and grindcore more. I was like, oh yeah, what's going on with death metal now? Like, I haven't paid attention to it in like 4 or 5 years. And we started going to the Palladium, which was probably the best place to see bigger metal gigs in Massachusetts at the time. There were a few things here and there, like at the Middle East and some other clubs. Like that Relapse Contamination tour came to the Middle East and some other stuff. But for a lot of the bigger bands, it was all about the Palladium. So the first proper black metal show that I ever attended was Immortal. I think it was at the Heart of Winter they were touring on. Don't quote me on that. Satyricon on Rebel Extravaganza, Angel Corpse, and Chrysian opening, I want to say. And that completely blew my mind, especially the kind of intense folky parts that Satyricon had. I'd never really heard anything like that before, and it just completely blew my mind. I was like, you know, just eyeballs popping out of my head. And Immortal was a force to be reckoned with for sure. I mean, just physically intimidating, huge guys. They always had a not totally serious kind of image, but they still hadn't been turned into a meme yet. And I wasn't there, but I was told about how Abath like went outside and just walked into the very sketchy streets of downtown Worcester in like 15-degree weather and just told the door guy to fuck off when he told him it was a bad idea. So that's a nice mental image there. And I went to shows at the Palladium for years and years. It was never the best venue. They had some pretty crappy pay-to-play kind of policies and a pretty terrible no re-entry deal and all that kind of stuff. Really bad sound on occasion, but you would catch some pretty good bands there if you were lucky, and they still do shows now. The other one that really springs to mind, especially out of just the sea of like many times that I saw Internal Bleeding and Dying Fetus and Skinless there during that little run. A few years later, I was living in Maine, and Motorhead was touring with Morbid Angel and Today Is the Day. And I went down with a friend of mine who I was my roommate from Maine, and we were hanging out in Boston the night before, and I think just got a commuter rail to Worcester during the day and just kind of hung out and went to the gig later. And it was great. I mean, it was the first time I'd seen Motorhead, and they knocked me on my ass for sure. Indeed, as loud as advertised. Morbid Angel was really good. I hadn't really listened to them since Covenant. I remember buying Domination when it came out. I was super disappointed by it. Like that record now. Really didn't like it when it came out. So I knew nothing about like the Steve Tucker stuff or anything, and they were good. I just wanted to hear Chapel of Ghouls for the most part. Didn't watch Today Is the Day. Still have trouble kind of getting into that band. I don't know what it is. Just never clicked with me. But my friend and I were trying to leave, and we're trying to get a ride somewhere. I know that we were leaning towards getting a ride back to Boston, and he was asking one group of people, and I was asking the other, and somehow our lines got crossed, and I thought he was all set and got his ride, and he thought the same about me somehow, and we both told our respective groups that we were all set, and we were stranded. And Worcester at night, as the door guy was warning Abath, is kind of like a sketchy place. I don't know about now, but, you know, a little seedy, a little dangerous. So it wasn't the greatest time after that. We were walking around in the cold, like trying to hail a cab and trying to find a hotel that didn't charge by the hour and was also somewhat reasonable before we went back to Maine the next day. Before we did that, we went to a small convenience store that was across a parking lot from the Palladium. And we're in there, and Trey Azagthoth is in there. And my friend, who was a retired, like, train hopper, traveling crust punk kind of dude, had no issue whatsoever being like, hey, Trey Azagthoth, can we get a ride with you guys? Are you guys going to Boston? And Trey was very, very polite, was like, no, sorry, we're going to Canada, but here's some guitar picks. So I had the pick for years. I don't have it anymore. Trying to think. I mean, over the years, I saw a lot of pretty crazy shows throughout the 2000s. Saw some pretty amazing bands. Matt from The Dark Path, I just watched his entry. He was talking about how over the years, his like perennial going to a fest, meeting up with people experience was going to MDF. I went to one MDF in 2013, which coincided with the last year of Chaos in Tejas, which happened annually in Austin, Texas from, I want to say, 06 till 2013. And I didn't go to every Chaos in Tejas, but from the second one on, I went like 3 years in a row, or 4 almost. Then I missed a few and then went to the very last one. And they were always incredible just because of the diversity of the lineups, how it really had that Austin festival feel before that got super commercial. This city just got overrun, basically. But it was almost like just a pure DIY hardcore punk version of South by Southwest. Started out at like 1 or 2 clubs, this big semi-open air 2-stage club called Emos that was great, and then usually like one other club, and then it just expanded and expanded and expanded, where there would be after shows, illegal after shows, like on a pedestrian bridge with like generators, people shooting off bottle rockets and stage diving off of lampposts and stuff. and the shows on boats that were like mini booze cruises with bands playing and everything. It was a really, really, really great experience. The bands that played, Rorschach, Cockspar, there's just a litany of bands. A bunch of Japanese bands. Frompted were incredible when I saw them. That was the last year. Bastard, you know, there was something for everybody. There's D-Beat, there was garage rock. Later on, few years in, they started having like black metal bands. As inexcusable and awful as they are, and Inquisition played, which at the time was like, wow, a black metal band, you know? The Black Twilight Circle bands all played like in a showcase one year. There was actually controversy because Dismo was playing one year, and a bunch of people from the punk scene found out what Craig Pollard's deal was. It was just a whole thing. Cockspar, Cro-Mags, Amoebics, Leatherface. I could go on and on. Like, all these bands played. The last year, The Damned, Bolt Thrower, Infest, those were the big, big bands. Infest coming back together was a really, really big deal. Midnight played a bunch of years in a row. Gordon Soley MF's played. I'll save that for my stories about crazy stuff later. It was just a great experience. Just a great, great experience seeing all that stuff. And all those bands in one place. It was always a great meetup and really, really cool. And it was funny because the last year, like I said, I went to MDF first. We rented a car, went to MDF, stopped along the way, stayed with my dad, visited my friend in Asheville, drove all the way to Texas after that, and kind of hung out. MDF, in comparison, it was a great year, 2013. It was amazing seeing, like, Pagan Altar and Manila Road, you know, within a week of each other. And I'm trying to think, actually, I think they both played that, but only Manila Road played Chaos and Teos. Not really important. Seeing Kronos' Venom, Crucimentium, I'm trying to think who else played, Sacred Reich, Sleep. Really, really great lineup, but it seemed like it was just so, I don't know, it seemed like it wasn't run as good. I'm not saying it wasn't run pretty well, but it definitely wasn't run as well as Chaos and Teos. And it's like the punks are the ones that are supposed to like not have their acts together, you know? Also, although MDF was a multi-venue affair as well, like, it was, at that point, Chaos and Teos was all over Austin, and everything went exactly on time. I guess the thing that happened every year, and maybe in the comments below you can corroborate this if you've attended MDF, when it was still in the parking lot under the overpass, I guess one of the issues was that there's a farmer's market that on Sunday always takes too long to clean their shit up, and they can't let people into the gig until that's gone. So that was the issue on the last time that I went. I wanted to see Speedwolf really bad, and it was a line that was literally a mile long. And I just couldn't help but kind of giggle to myself waiting to get in how, like, I'm not getting to see this badass, like, motor charged speed metal band, and the forces of evil are being thwarted right now by, like, organic kale, you know? And also there's a curfew thing in Baltimore, and Venom's set got cut off in the middle of Warhead, which I thought people were going to ride over, but they didn't. It seemed like it was just kind of a lot of a sloppier affair. And I always thought that, like, metal dudes were supposed to be, you know, the ones that were more professional and had their act together or whatever. But anyway, I mean, I could go on and talk about shows that I've attended and how good bands were till the cows come home. But I've been talking enough about that, so... Some of these gigs that I already mentioned, there's some wild stuff that happened. I don't know exactly what everybody's gauge for wild shit is. I mean, I came up in the 90s where, like, I saw kind of messed up stuff fairly regularly, but then I read about the punk scene in LA in the 80s, or New York, or anywhere, and I'm like, well, nobody got murdered in front of me, so pretty tame, I guess. But there's a few things that spring to mind. One was my friend Devlin and I, we were both living in Florida. I did also live in Florida, briefly, for like 9 months or so. I went down to Tampa to visit him. There was a tour with Creator and Napalm Death, and I was like, awesome. I'd seen Napalm a handful of times, hadn't seen Creator at all. I was like, oh, cool, and it's in Florida. It'll be really well attended. apparently the venue changed a few times or something. They had trouble placing the show. So I don't know if it was because of that or just, who knows, maybe just general lack of interest. But there were less than 100 people at a Creator and Napalm Death show in the Tampa area. And I know it'd been a long time since the heyday of the early 90s for death metal and stuff like that down there, but I was still kind of surprised. And the bands were both really good. It's easier to kind of vibe with Napalm Death in front of a small crowd because they kind of have the approach of more of a punk band. Plus, I think they were touring off of Leaders Not Followers, so they were covering like Cryptic Slaughter and stuff. They were good. They were pretty enjoyable. Barney still had a lot more bass behind his voice back then. This is mid-2000, 2005, I think. And then Creator plays, and they've got a whole setup that's like Dayglow with like the demon mascot guy. And I love Millet, but like he's got this whole like metal like fucking stage banter. And it's just seeming a little sad because it's falling upon not deaf ears, but just very few ears, There's like 50 people there. He's like, "Are you feeling extremely violent?" And yay! There's like a handful of people there. And to make matters worse, I don't know what the story is, but like it's kind of a dirty club. People were kind of like drunk and like trying to mosh and just spilling beer everywhere. And there's this girl, this kind of hot topic-y looking girl, who proceeds to like strip down to almost nothing, to like a thong, and I don't think she ever took her top off, but she was like, like meth skinny and just like wriggling around on the floor, doing weird stripper stuff, and like, at one point like a guy had her like this, and she was like grinding on him and stuff, like during Creator. It was fucking weird and fucking gross. She was like covered in like beer dirt, slime. I don't know. I was not feeling that at all. It's a really odd gig. So that's a good memory, or not great. For a while, another thing that springs to mind is in 1999, a bunch of friends and I went over to jolly old England to kind of just check out the scene there. We were like little crust punk dudes. We wanted to see if like we could squat in London, and we did. We my friends did, and I came over like a week later with another kid. But a few friends of mine kind of broke into a council flat and fixed it up, and put in. I think they even put in sheetrock and everything. And we were there for a while, and then some weird stuff happened with the guy living across the street where we didn't quite feel safe, so we bounced. That's a story in and of itself. And we just kind of hung out. We met other people in Hackney and stayed at a few places. It was a really cool learning experience. We were just over there to just like drink and see bands play. I think we went to a few museums. A friend of mine that I always traveled with and that I'd hang out with when we'd go over there would always made it a point to like, yes, let's go to museums. Let's not just listen to crust punk and get hammered. But at one point we hitchhiked up to Nottingham, England, to go to a Punk's Picnic. Punk's Picnics are funny because that's what they're called. I've been to 4 or 5, which isn't a ton, but I still haven't been to one yet where there's like really any food. It's basically just drinking in a park until maybe 5 or 6 when the bands start playing, and then usually it's like a 2-day affair, like a mini fest. Dozen or so bands play. The one in Nottingham, I can't remember all the bands that played that year. Hellcrusher played, who were awesome, and Cress, and a bunch of other ones. Maybe Oi Polloi played, I don't remember. But it wasn't so much about the show, but what happened before, so I don't know if this counts, but the picnic is part of the event, so whatever. We're all hanging out. We didn't get much sleep the night before because we hitchhiked from London, and my friend who I was traveling with forgot his backpack on the side of the road. So we had to go back and get it somehow, which I don't remember what that entailed. We didn't arrive into Nottingham until like 3 or 4 in the morning, and we slept outside. We crashed next to some church, like in the bushes. And like, you don't really get good sleep when you're sleeping on the ground, even if you're exhausted. So we were asleep, for like maybe 4 hours tops. And then we go and start drinking immediately. In most places in the UK, at least at the time, I don't know about now, street drinking's totally legal. Which is great for somebody who's like, barely 21 from the U.S. who can go over and drink wherever he pleases. On top of that, again, don't know the story now. This is decades ago. They used to sell hard cider in 2-liter soda bottles for cheap, and you could drink it legally on the street. So, you know, we had our huge bottles of hard cider, Scrumpy cider, or whatever it was called, and we're, you know, knocking them back, and it's just, you know, it's a bunch of punk rockers hanging out in a park. Everybody's kind of getting to know each other, and people are friendly. Like, there's people there with their dogs and stuff, just shooting the shit. But I noticed, like, a contingent of 3 punks that look, like, really gross, and not in that, like, manicured, sort of, like, crusty way of, like, yes, I don't bathe on purpose because this is the image I'm trying to portray. That would have been me at the time, actually. You know, like, ooh, I have carefully formed dreads and placed oh so well Doom and Amoebix patches. These people looked legitimately like homeless and desperate. They were nice enough, but they're already like messed up on something. And that was the thing. I was like, this just isn't just booze. You know, I could tell, even though I was extremely naive at the time. And one of them comes up to me and he's got like, the thing to do, I guess, is you have your empty beer can and you hold it up and you're like, can you share some sips of your lager? And I was like, yeah, all right, here you go. And then they came around again and I was like, okay. And I think they came around again and I said no, or they just lost interest. At one point the guy was like, do you want to swap badges? And I'm like, oh, you want to trade pins? Okay. Like the pins on my vest. And I was like, all right, well, yeah, I got this DRI pin. And the dude didn't know who they were. He's like, all right. And he gave me, I wish I still had it. I had the pin for years. He gave me a cartoon. It was I think it's a slang term over there. It said pissed as a newt. And it had like a drunk, like newt, like the little lizard, like hiccuping. I was like, that's awesome. I can get a DRI pin anywhere. Sold, sir. But when he took my DRI pin, he's like, and he just like pierced his nipple with it. And I was like, all right, this guy's weird and gross. I hate this. So at a certain point before the gig, I'm walking around and like, I can't remember the kid's name for the life of me. It's been so long. But there was this really nice Scandinavian punk dude. I can't remember if he was Danish or Norwegian or what, but you know, he's relatively quiet, very pale, dreaded mohawk, like you do at the time. And at one point, he disappeared. Like, we assumed he just went off to like take a piss somewhere, which was happening frequently. We're all drinking. But he came back and he was just, I mean, it was crazy how quick the swelling had happened. Those people who we found out were heroin addicts, like, beat him within an inch of his life, it seemed like. Just, like, not just a shiner, like, lumps, like, all, like, bruises. I don't know what he did. He was such a quiet, non-assuming dude. Like, apparently, they just, maybe he said no when they were asking for beer. Like, I don't know. But it was really, really messed up. So at that point, everybody went on a hunt for these malcontents. And I saw, I mean, I've seen a fair amount of fights, you know, especially at hardcore shows and stuff over the years, but I'd never seen, like, this was like straight up like soccer violence, you know, like it was a bad beatdown. Like, there was a big skinhead dude who had like cap toe boots that got one of these kids, and it was seriously like a FIFA goal. Like, and when his boots hit this kid's skull, it sounded like a block of wood just like being hit with like a battering ram or something. It was, you could hear it. It was so loud. I still never forget it. And like, they got beat up. There's a woman amongst them, so the skinhead dude's bird kicked her ass. It's all very equal, you know. And then we hung out like at their apartment afterwards, the people that administered the beating, and they were very nice, but they were like, yeah, you just can't, these people are scumbags. They have no place in our scene. You can't tolerate them coming around and like rat packing somebody like that. I was like, fair enough. You know, I think also at some point as they were running away, I was like, that's what you get for fucking with us. Like, classic, like, dude not fighting bullshit, you know? So yeah, that was a good one. One of my most memorable sets from the previously mentioned Chaos and Teos gig was a band called Gordon Soley Motherfuckers from Cleveland. And I actually heard from people that this was a contained environment. It wasn't on their hometown soil, so it was like comparatively meek compared to some of their shows. But the Cleveland scene, especially starting off with like H100s and Nine Shocks Terror, was notorious for all kinds of crazy stuff going down, especially fireworks going off during their sets. Gordon Solie, obviously, if you know anything about wrestling and who Gordon Solie was. We're a wrestling-themed, like, kind of fast, raw, hardcore band fronted by National Treasure, Tony Erba. And I'd never seen them. I'd only heard stories about the wild stuff that happened. I will say this about their set. One of my top 5 most scared I've ever been in any pit. There was, I believe, definitely a TV broken in the middle of the pit. A ladder, a very large chain were brought out at a certain point. There were piñatas, which was fun. Piñatas thrown all over the place that broke open, and inside them was just coffee grounds for some reason. And Emo's, the venue, like I said, it was like semi-open air. Like there was part of the near the stage where there wasn't any like walls, and it was just like that kind of waffly metal roof, you know, like Southern style. And it was very hot during the day there. Most of the time these fests took place, it was like late spring, so it gets pretty hot and awesome at that time. Massive fans going, like fans taller than me, just whipping. So they were whipping these all this debris and detritus like into these fans, and it's spraying all over everybody. Coffee, just covered in coffee grounds for some fucking reason. And I've never actually seen it other than this one time. You see it in old videos from the 80s. Like, I think the footage of Megadeth in the Second Decline of Western Civilization, there's a mosh pit that goes, it's like a circle pit that goes up onto the stage and almost like a Congo line of like people just running like one after the other on the stage and off. That was going on, but like everybody was diving feet first. Like, everything was just like, fuck. It was amazing. Like, it was unhinged. There was this big dude named Sean who was like a bodybuilder physique, like swinging a massive chain around. It was so great. It was so fun. But there was definitely people just like taking shots at people. Like, it was just bedlam. It wasn't some like new school hardcore pit where like you got to stay, you know, be careful where you stand in the horseshoe, or the gigantic, you know, heavyset guy in the windbreaker is gonna like punch one unlucky person in the face. It wasn't like that. It was like everybody was going nuts, and it was just like equal footing on how chaotic it was. Really, really, really fun. They took the big metal folding ladder away, unfortunately. So that's too bad. But yeah, that was crazy. Seeing Bile, not a band that has not really held up well musically, in my opinion. I should go back and check them out. But they were essentially like KMFDM meets Biohazard. Like, they were metallic, industrial stuff. I will give it to them that they had like a original kind of aesthetic. Like, it was very like grimy and New York and tough, but they were industrial. And I saw them open for Guar. Buzz Oven was also supposed to open, which I'm so bummed I never got to see them during their heyday. Buzz Oven, who knows, maybe drugs or something, they never showed up. There's this huge delay where people are just yelling for Guar to go on. And Bile's just like setting up, presumably waiting for Buzz Oven. Like, sometimes the Lost had really long wait times and delays and stuff anyway. And they go on and they play, and they're just, everything's neon green. They're all wearing like weird masks. There's like 7 or 8 of them on stage, I seem to remember. Probably more, like, my memory's skewed, I'm sure. Probably like 5 or 6. But a ton of them on stage, like playing instruments. A couple people like MCing. Like, there's some of their songs were kind of hip-hop-ish. It looked like the Wu-Tang Clan and Scorpion from Mortal Kombat, like, merged. And the front row, like, those crowds at the Lost in the 90s were ruthless. Like, some of the metal crowds. And, you know, a lot of these people I don't remember favorably, even though, like, you know, I'm a huge into metal kind of person. A lot of them were super trashy and super racist and just, like, really didn't have a very good taste in music. They were just there to, like, get hammered and, like, push mosh, you know. Not really a lot of love for some of the people from that scene. You know, lots of cool people, too. But it was just all these, like, randos, all these, like, state fair, like, rednecks up front, like, yelling at them because they're not Guar, even though they're witnessing something pretty incredible, at least in terms of their stage aesthetic. And, like, they were, like, spitting on people in their faces, kicking people in the front row. There was, like, a kind of a dominatrix kind of lady with them who was, like, breathing fire. Like, the whole thing was insane. And they played a few years later with the Evil Mothers, and I was really excited to see them. A couple of friends of mine were, too, and it was a 3-piece. And they had the cool, you know, the highlighter marker, glowing yellow, everything, green and yellow kind of style stuff, but there's no crazy stage show, and we were kind of bummed about that. I've been to lots of Halloween shows. I find these to be really fun. Like in a festival setting, there's always the one or two people that is like, check it out, I'm dressed like a banana, you know, and something about that is just annoying. I know I'm not alone in that, but Halloween shows where everybody is dressed up as random shit can be really fun. Like I went to a lot of hardcore shows, specifically in my hometown, that were like in a community center. Timeout. I didn't even mention what we were listening to. Hostile Rage. It's a collection of demos and then like a new recording from this Jersey thrash band. More like kind of rock and roll thrash, you know? Wargasm, got a, kind of a Motorhead thing going on. Really good. I'm going to play that again. Because it's one of those things where it's going and then I'm talking and then I hit re-record because the thing freezes. So yeah, I mean, it's fun to see a bunch of people moshing and they're all in costume. It's like, oh, there's a bunch of people all dressed up like Gang Green from the Powerpuff Girls. Oh, and there's Ollie G moshing with a banana. You know, like, that was always really fun. One of the biggest ones was the Western Mass Halloween show that was like in 2002. The Western Mass hardcore scene featured like a lot of really fast, ripping 80s style hardcore bands. The Prowl, who all were kind of horror punk, they all dressed up like vampires. The A-Team, who, you know, were on sort of a SOD, like, you know, meat men, like offensive kind of tip, all dressed up as people who died of AIDS. The AIDS team. Wouldn't fly these days, probably. You know, and there were lots of good creative costumes. There was a guy who had like a monster mask, and like it was one of those monster masks that came with hair, and he dreaded it and had like a merch table with him and was trying to sell free AOL discs with breakdown demo written on them, and he was Rick to life. So like stuff like that that's very era specific, and you have to know hardcore to get why that's funny, but it's funny, trust me. Very of its era, but like that was a really fun show. It was huge, massive. One of those gigs that I've attended where the pit is so big and it's going in a circle, you can feel wind coming off of it. That was really fun. Speaking of like the older hardcore scene, when I was living up in Maine for a while, I started going to see more and more like straightforward hardcore bands. I was burning out on grind and death metal and stuff like that and crust, just because my roommates listened to it constantly. And one band that I would go to see all the time that was really fun was this band called Outbreak. And their guitarist was this dude, Chris, who, last I checked, was playing in Terror for a while. And he was always one of those athletic guys. You'd go to these shows and you'd see these dudes just flying off of shit, you know, flying off the stage, whatever, dancing super hard. But it was some band that played with Outbreak, and they broke into one of those, you know, breakdown mosh parts. And this was kind of the era where, like, there was no people colliding with each other so much. It was just a bunch of people standing in place and punching down. So it was like a sea of people all in their own little bubble, their little safe space, floor punching, you know? And I see Chris run across everybody's backs, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but like moshing. That was one of the more incredible things I've ever seen, because he made it all the way across a room. It was a big room. Also, I had a lot of fond memories of the community center I used to play shows at with my old bands and occasionally book and just hang out at. That was the cornerstone of the Syracuse scene when the Lost Horizon wasn't really a viable option anymore. That was later on in the mid-2000s. The Westcott Community Center, which was a repurposed fire station. What was great about it was it was just in the middle of a neighborhood, like a residential neighborhood. For whatever reason, the neighbors were cool enough they didn't really complain about the noise. The shows were usually over by 7 or 8, so it wasn't really an issue. They're all ages, you know, that kind of deal. Most of the types of gigs there didn't really bring out a lot of people who were there to like sneak in beers and try to get drunk. It just wasn't that kind of a deal. But occasionally, because it was just a community center, people just used to but people used to just kind of come in out of curiosity. One was, I thought it was a guy maybe in one of the bands that was playing from New York or something, but it just turned out he was a dude that just got out of prison. I don't know, maybe he just happened by seeing people load instruments in. He was just excited to like not be in jail and be around music. I don't know. But he just had the weirdest reactions to what was being played. Like, he clearly had never heard or seen this type of stuff before, and he was just doing like weird robot dances. and kind of shuffling and doing this. Like, there's a lot of stuff like that I find very memorable. Occasionally, like, homeless dudes would just kind of come in and hang out and stuff. Probably the worst as far as, like, bad Nazi violence. Integrity played in Rochester, I want to say 97 or so. I was living there for a little bit, and we saw these guys when we got there, and it was a weird mix of bands. There was Burning Human, who were like almost a death metal band from Troy, New York. They were like death metal hardcore stuff. Catharsis, who went on to be super left-leaning political metalcore stuff from down here, and Integrity. I think there's one or two other bands playing. And we saw the guys show up, and we were like, oh no. Because, I mean, we knew that these guys were around. They were a fucking problem. They were bullies. You know, they were out there trying to spread their bullshit and trying to recruit people and stuff. And apparently they were downstairs. It was like a VFW hall, and there was a bar down there. And I didn't see them. At the time, I was tabling and handing out literature with a group called Anti-Racist Action. So I had a target on my back. And when Integrity started playing, they filed out like these huge bonehead guys, like on either side of the pit. There were like maybe 7 or so that came out on each side and just went, and it was just, the hardcore kids didn't want them there. We're not having it, you know, and it was just a brawl every other song. Nothing else really came of it after that. Apparently the promoter, from what I gathered, used to be friends with them and somewhat sympathetic to their causes, and decided he didn't want to be associated anymore, and that was their way of coming out and fucking with him, apparently. But they're singing along the lyrics and stuff. They knew Integrity. What happened a few months later was Sick of It All played in Buffalo at the Showcase Theater, and 3 of them decided to show up, which was a dumb move because they got beat up pretty bad. So yeah, that's all the craziness, wild stuff. There's a few other things that I'm forgetting. Oh yeah, seeing Municipal Waste numerous times and them just thinking of the most ridiculous ways to circle pit. There was like a DIY show at like a little lodge, like a community center, but it was like a quaint little lodge one that has a fireplace on a lake in Rochester in like a park. And I'd see a lot of shows there. And it was dark too. They called for everybody to circle pit around the lodge thing. I also saw them in a pretty big house with like a living room, and they were got a circle pit all throughout the house, like that kind of stuff. Yeah, fun shit with them, but that was the one thing I forgot. So anyway, that's enough. I mean, how long have I been talking? My mouth is so dry right now. 44 minutes, Jesus Christ. I'm sorry if you're still watching this. I admire your stick with it attitude. Okay. Yep. I like all Celtic Frost. Is this the Celtic Frost that I like the least? Yes. Are there elements of it and parts of it where I'm still like, he's still got that riff style though. He's trying to sound pretty, but you know he ain't. You know? I like it. I don't, you know, I get it. You've been listening to a lot of Hanoi Rocks. You saw the commercial success of what was going on in the States. Can't blame a guy for trying. Cherry Orchards, man. It's kind of a bop, you know? A lot of people don't like this. I think it's good, but I know a lot of people think this is a sucky Iron Maiden record, No Prayer for the Dying. I like it because it's kind of a return to form, you know, away from all the kind of proggy stuff they were doing previously. Obviously, like, Tail Gunner's like Aces High Part 2, it's really obvious, but I realize Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter. It's like awful in so many ways. Other bad stuff that I don't have a hard copy to show of at the moment, handy, either buried in the pile behind me or whatever. I don't like Load and Reload or Saint Anger, but I do like the Black Album. I like Hardwired, and I like Death Magnetic by Metallica. Not a huge fan, but I was so excited when Death Magnetic came out because I could tell they were at least trying to sound like how they used to, and that was enough for me. I just like listened to it incessantly, and now I try to listen to it, and I'm like, there's a lot of filler and a lot of ugh on this. I'm not feeling. I also like a little bit of Graves era Misfits, which I still stand by the fact that if they changed the name to something else, it would have been a different story entirely. I like a lot of real happy-go-lucky, like, bro college music from the 90s is the best way I can put it. I love the Spin Doctors, and I love Blues Traveler, you know? I have this kind of almost like jam band alter ego. I think it's like my id, you know, it's just hiding in the darkness. It's because my parents were Deadheads, I think. And I was exposed to festivals, those kind of festivals, where I was on a blanket, like hearing people jam out for hours on end. I'm sure I saw the Grateful Dead once or twice when I was really little. And I hated that band for years, but, you know, lately, once in a while I throw them on and it really hits the spot. Not a super fan, but, you know, especially since my mom has passed and everything, there's something... maybe it's just my little way of, like, you know, remembering her and stuff, but not to get too heavy. Yeah, that's for bad shit I like. And okay, I'm going out of order here, but other music you like besides metal? I talk fairly often about non-metal music I like. I feel like it usually falls within the realm of like hardcore punk or death rock. You know, I've had a couple of phases that if you've been watching the channel for a while, you've noticed I've gone on big binges of gothy stuff and post-punk stuff. So I'm wearing a Bauhaus shirt right now. So I won't talk about that. I didn't do any updates around it just because I feel like I sound like an idiot trying to talk about it because there's so little I can really pontificate on about it. And it was also during my Elden Ring binge. But I got really into just going on a deep dive of specific types of hip hop for a little while. A lot of 90s hip hop stuff, a few newer releases. I have way more than this, but I figured just talk about a handful. Bob Vylan, Price of Life, UK hip hop artist who not pure hip hop by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot of rock and roll involved in this, a lot of like anarcho punk, bit of reggae if I'm remembering right, and it's distinctly kind of like UK style endeavor, like the hip hop styles like that. Again, I don't want to sound like an idiot, but whether it's grime or garage, whatever the kind of flavors of hip hop over there, it's like that, but with like a lot of punk influence. It's really, really good. Cool Keith and Phaeton. So, you know, if you know anything about like underground hip hop, even if you're a total pleb like me, you know that Cool Keith is a long-running, talented contributor to the genre. And this is him collaborating with normally I guess they're kind of a power violence band called Phaeton. I've never heard of them. Thetan. On this, they're doing kind of weird, like ambient, noisy, almost kind of sludgy stuff, as sort of the drum and bass-ish kind of stuff in the background. It's got a ton of guest people on it, including Black Dahlia from the Dwarves. It's wild. A couple more. This is, I listened to this a lot in high school, actually. Bought it again because it's great. Jamie the Damaja, Wrath of the Math. It's great, like mid-90s stuff. Sort of conscious, you know, like East Coast hip-hop stuff. Disposable Heroes of Hypocrisy. I first heard these dudes because they covered a Dead Kennedys song on Virus 100. So again, like political, like early 90s hip-hop stuff from Bay Area. And the other genre that I've talked about liking it, but haven't talked about it in a while, and I just kind of randomly was like, oh yeah, why don't I go through this section of my records, because I have them organized by genre. I really like a lot of kind of folkish stuff, old and new. I'm not so much into the kind of Americana, like Woody Guthrie, country-ish kind of American style kind of folk. That's okay. I like it when it comes on like a playlist or whatever. I like stuff that's a little bit more like European or English, Ren Fairy kind of folk stuff. Modern and new. This is a band called Espers. I don't know jack about them, to be honest. They're a newer, not new. I think this came out like maybe 15 years ago or something. But it's, I guess you could even call it neo-folk maybe. But it's super mellow, male and female vocals, really like calming. I play it at work when everything's going crazy. Bagushkin, King's Curse, another modern act. think it's from New York, I think. But it's like a solo project. Let me just read this. This is from my friend's store, Heaven Street, and which I don't think is around anymore. But he always wrote these blurbs on his poly bags that were always like really well done. Recorded live to tape in 2 days after a sleep-deprived month of Beefheart-style creative lockdown. Bagushkin, Dan Smith's eight-headed Hydra, laid the twilight folk of 2007's nightly things to rest and reemerged with the wicked, strange, hard rock gypsy shake of King's Curse, in which Smith yells and carries on like a man possessed while telling tales of the damnation of a robber king. I don't remember it being that crazy. I remember it being relatively mellow, but I guess it is kind of wild-ass for folk. Haven't listened to it in a while. It's pretty good, though. That Nightly Things is good, too. I have that on CD. And then Woven Hand. Another modern band. This is recent. And this band has a lot of stuff out. I don't know if all their stuff is this folky. This is way out of my area of expertise here. I just really like the sound of this. Kind of indie folk kind of stuff, I guess. Fuck you, Polybag. You ain't going around that. Planksty. This is Irish stuff from the 70s. Very, very strong, like, Irish folk, like, traditional Irish influence, obviously. A lot of these are reworkings of trad Irish songs. But they kind of were like hippies that were around at the time and kind of doing their own thing with the traditional music of their forebears. It's really cool. They have a lot of great records. And then Straubs. This is Rick Wakeman from Yes's band. I think previous to Yes, am I right? But yeah, it's got kind of a like it's got that pronounced Hammond organ, like kind of proggy thing going on, and a little bit of heavier stuff going on with it. But it's very, very much like British folk. Hangman and the Papist is amazing, but yeah, it's kind of dark and super nice, like almost angelic in a lot of parts. Not folk, but I had to grab this. This was a gift from Mike Seatown. Love Neil, man. Wrote all the really, really good Monkey songs. Just great 60s pop, you know, singer-songwriter pop stuff. She Got to Me, Solitary Man, Cherry Cherry. I'm kind of done with Sweet Caroline after living in Boston for so long, but I'll take the rest of them. So all the great hits on this one. And then finally got Nick Drake. This is Made to Love Magic. This isn't my favorite record of his. I think this might be a compilation of different recordings. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I don't know. It's a beautiful record regardless. Pink Moon will always be my favorite Nick Drake record. 5 Leaves Left is also exemplary. He didn't write any bad music. Sadly, gone. Very young. When I first heard Nick Drake, I had a lot of friends that were into the indie stuff at the time, and I kind of liked some of it. Didn't really obsess over it too much because it was such a trendy thing to be into metal or hardcore, and then being like, no, I'm all about iron and wine now, you know. But a lot of it kind of got into my ear holes one way or another, mostly through coworkers and roommates, and I liked some of that stuff. You know, the aforementioned Iron and Wine, Brian Jonestown Massacre, etc., etc. All that kind of mopey twee shit from the late 2000s, or mid 2000s probably. I didn't pull anything. I really like Belle and Sebastian. The first 3 Belle and Sebastian records anyway. Didn't really explore anything past those, but man, I love those records. But I was surprised by Pink Moon, thinking of all that kind of twee indie stuff. When I first heard it, I just thought it was a new artist that sounded like all this stuff coming out. It was from the 70s, so... What else do you collect? Okay, so I shot some footage with my phone. I'm going to edit it in here. I don't know what's going to be playing as I edit it, so I'll just talk about the stuff I collect. I collect... I'm not as much of a completist about collecting anything else. I have no desire to... Because I put all my hard work and my hard-earned money into the records, you know? But occasionally I'm like, ooh, there's a thing. I'm a great lover of stuff, as Chromie has said about me once or twice. So I like VHSs. I'm not into trying to find any like really expensive, rare ones. It's mostly just like, hey, this is a crappy movie anyway. If I can own this movie for $3, like, I don't really care if it doesn't have the best quality. You know, it kind of feels good to watch it in the old grainy format. So I have some VHSs. A ton of them are horror. You know, lots of like classic 80s and 90s stuff. I have like a few runs of specifically 2 BBC series that I love. You can't really see, it's like far behind me here, but I have all the Young Ones volumes on VHS, a whole bunch of Red Dwarf, which I really like. I have a bunch of wrestling stuff mostly on DVD, but also a little bit on VHS, I think. Doesn't matter the format, really. But I have a ton of collections of classic 70s and 80s wrestling. A lot of those, like Downfall of the WCW, like, you know, WWE, yellow journalism, retelling history kind of documentaries. But I own them. They're a fun watch. A ton of those, you know, a bunch of those roundtable ones when Dusty Rhodes was still alive. All of them kind of sitting around smoking cigars, talking about the old days. There's like a bunch of volumes of those that are cool. Collect those. I don't have an extensive movie collection. At a certain point, I was like, I'm not the biggest cinephile. I'm definitely no like explosive action kind of guy or Eric Bauer, but I do have like a fair amount of DVDs, and it's all the stuff that I was like, okay, this is a classic movie I can watch over and over again that I've loved since I was, you know, whatever, somewhere between 0 and 22. You know, I gotta own that. So I have all those. You know, I have Ghostbusters 1 and 2 and RoboCop and all that kind of stuff. You know, into more obscure, weird shit like Street Trash and, you know, stuff that's a little bit more, you know, Peter Jackson pre-Lord of the Rings movies and that kind of stuff. Cronenberg, my favorite, Terry Gilliam, you know, I got all that stuff. I also collect video games, mostly old format video games. I have a ton of Nintendo stuff. I'm also not a completist with that stuff either. I mostly wanted to get all the games that, you know, I played as a kid, a few others that I was kind of curious about. Not into breaking the bank on those. You can easily if you're trying to find really rare stuff. You know, my name is Pat, but I'm not Pat the NES punk, so I'm not going to be trying to buy every NES game that ever happened. I've got an original NES system, an original Sega Genesis 2, and a GameCube for all my old consoles. I also have one of those retro bit ones that's supposed to play everything, but I can't get it working right now, so we'll just kind of not worry about that. Oh yeah, and I collect skateboards. I haven't hung any of mine up since I've moved. They're still in my garage, still wrapped up in the brown paper that the movers put them in. And that's another thing where it's like they're cool to hang up. I got the one board that was my first original skateboard that I got that was a real nice, like from a skate shop kind of skateboard, not a Nash or a Veriflex, which is a Craig Johnson Elva Mini. I found a new old stock one of those right before shit started getting really expensive for skateboard collecting. I got one of those. That's all I need. I have the board from my youth, you know. But beyond that, I have a bunch of like band boards, which surprisingly are a lot cheaper. Like I've got a really nice Wolf Brigade one, or Varukers one. If you remember my old setup back in Salem, there was always like a Blood Feast one hanging up behind me. So I'd rather collect ones of bands because they still look cool and I don't have to pay an arm and a leg. You know, even a reproduction that came out a couple of years ago is like $300 now, and I'm just not. Unless it's the Nodus Drunk Cat Mini, I don't want it. So, yeah, that's about it. I can't believe how friggin' long this turned out. Oh my god, this is gonna need some serious editing for sure. But Dennis, keep up the good work. Thank you for everything you're doing. Always look forward to your updates. You rule. Enjoy. Bye.